Hey, what's going on, everyone? So today I wanted to talk about a recent project I worked on where I rescored the music in Deathloop for the first stage. And I thought this would be an interesting opportunity to try out a technique called branching, which is allowing the music to change to different sections without having to interrupt the music. So when you want to change from one state to the next, it's not going to interrupt the music. It'll wait till a natural point in the music and it'll shift to the next section. And I thought this would be a great way to try this out. So I basically created some music and then I had to implement it into the program Wwise. So in this video, we're going to dig into the music itself, what I was thinking when I was what was I thinking? No, what was going through my head as I was trying to come up with ideas? And then how did I make those ideas work when it came to using Wwise? So let's first talk about Deathloop itself. The game is an immersive sim, and there's three main things that end up happening in the game. You are exploring around, and then you have enemies nearby, and then you get into a kind of tension-like state where those enemies are nearby, but you're not interacting with them yet. And you're trying to decide, do I want to sneak around or do I want to engage with them? And then there's the combat. So you're actively fighting enemies here, and then you're either going to win or they're going to kill you, in which case there's a neat thing that happens in this game, which is the game's namesake. You're going to loop back in time and respawn. You get another chance to actually take out the enemies. And so you're not sure exactly how far you're going to go, but it's a neat little thing, and we'll talk more about how I deal with this in the implementation side of things. So my first thought was, okay, I need to write 3 different pieces of music. And because we were branching, I thought what would be kind of nice is that each of those pieces of music can be fairly different from each other. They don't have to just be one long stream of music. And so I started off with a slower tempo, and then for the tension music, I bumped up the tempo a bit, and then combat has even a higher tempo to get the heart pumping. And all those 3, I also changed the key. So I started in C minor, I ended up going to D minor, and then E minor. And branching, because of that, you're able to make those transitions and make them sound like they work. So it doesn't feel like, oh, I've just interrupted the music, and oh, now we're all of a sudden in a new key. So the other thing about Deathloop is it has a very distinctive art style and the world that you're in. So it takes place in the 1960s, but it has this futuristic feel to it. There is this interesting technology in the game. And so I wanted some music that was going to capture both the organic feeling and also a synthetic feeling. I thought it was kind of futuristic, so I could use synthesizers, but I felt like that didn't really capture it right. So I wanted to do something that was a little bit of both. So I actually had recently recorded a bunch of sounds, and I thought, let me try to use these sounds I recorded here in my studio. Things like banging on my bass guitar with my recorder, boom, or scraping the strings of the guitar, or banging it on a water jug for drums, using my cello, all kinds of different things. And I wanted to figure out how to use those to build some new music. And so as we go through, I will point out some things so you can hear examples of how I use these interesting sounds to create music. All right, so let's go ahead and take a look at the Wwise project. So here we have the interactive music hierarchy. You see we got the state switch, some stingers and bridges. Most of the music is actually here in the state switch. But before we talk about that, let's go over to game syncs. So this is important. This is how the program is going to, Wwise is going to talk with the game engine itself. So I've created a player state, and I have all of these different states for that player that correspond to the things that I was talking about: explore, tension, combat, right? The win and respawn. So if we go back into audio and check out this state switch I was talking about, you'll notice all these playlists correspond to those states. In fact, I associated them. I can basically just click here, drag it over, and it associates them. So you see I have all this. Tension is associated with the tension playlist, right? So let's take a look at one of these. Got the explore playlist. And now this is just these 8 pieces of music played in a row. But the thing is, these aren't 8 different pieces of music. They're really just 8 sections of the same piece of music. So played together, it's one cohesive piece of music. Explore 1 here, this is just a 2-bar phrase. So let's open this up. Let's take a look at the segment itself. And we can see the track inside and the wave file on that track, right? You'll see we have a green bar and a red bar. That's the, sorry, I said 2 bars. It's actually 3 bars. This one is different from all the rest. Actually, it's 2 bars worth of music. There's 1 bar of padding to make the music more spaced out. I didn't want the Explore music too overbearing. Then these last 2 bars after this red, this is the reverb tail. This is what they call the post-exit in Wwise. So when it plays the next piece of music, it's going to try to line it up with this red line. Now I've defined what the tempo is right here, so it knows where these bars and beats are. So this works really well for music that has music created to a click track. Now the reason why you want this is because when I switch to the next piece of music, I wanted to keep playing the sustain of the notes that were here. I don't want them to just cut off, because even though new music is playing, you will notice it will sound like something is just a little bit off. So this allows these to play in order, but still sound like cohesive music as if it was one piece of music. But the brilliant thing about that is having it this way in chunks, I can set this up to exit at the end of any one of these chunks, so that it'll sound like it's exiting this playlist and say going to another playlist in a way that sounds very musical. It doesn't just cut off the music and, okay, now we're in tension. No, we want to make sure that we're creating musical transitions. So at the end of the phrase, the melody ends naturally and it sounds nice. And actually, let me go ahead and, I forgot to play this so you get an idea. You hear my 3-note motif there. That's the end right there. And there's 2 more bars. Now, I talked before about using interesting sounds that I created. This is one of them. Now, you might think this sounds like electric piano or a synthesizer or something, but this actually, surprisingly, and I had no idea this was going to work out this way, and I couldn't have planned it if I tried, but that is a soprano recorder sample. I was blowing on a recorder, and I was getting a stranger sound out of it, but I put it into the sampler and I took away the attack of my initial blow and just took the middle section out. Then I messed with it a little bit. I added the attack, decay, sustain to it and started playing it. I was like, wow, this plays really nicely. I just had to tune it just to make sure it was perfect. And I just started playing. This whole thing came from me just messing around on my keyboard, playing just this patch. And then I would add other sounds into it. But there's the first example of a sound that's organic in nature, but synthetically, processed and created to create the music itself, right? And so all 8 of these chunks have a very similar. So there's the first 4, then it changes to the 4 chord. So it's in C minor. It's on the 1 chord, changes to the 4 chord for the second half, and then loops back around. So the playlist also has that information built in. I say right here, loop count infinite. It'll just keep going once it gets to the end. Same situation for the tension playlist. We don't have to spend too much time on that, but just to give you a sense of how it sounds. You notice it sounds very different than the last one. And that's the cool thing about branching. It allows you to say, okay, this situation is different. I want to change to a new section, but I want it to sound like it was supposed to go there. This one is actually in the key of D minor, and it's also 100 BPM. So the tempo's gone up, the key is going up. So it just has the sense of like, in all ways, the tension is rising. This one has a combination of my sounds, and you heard the violins in there. That's just from a library. Another one these 2 have been using, you'll hear there's a drum sound in there. That's actually me banging on a water jug and with a lot of reverb, and it sounds very epic. The next thing to check out is this combat playlist. Now, if you notice, when it loads, this looks very different from the other ones. And here I've used the random functionality of Wwise. So I didn't want this to play the same exact thing over and over again. I thought, let's spice things up and let the combat music sort of build itself as it goes. So all these sections, they're all relate to each other, and I wanted them to be modular so that as I was writing this, the idea in my head was I want to make things that these little 2-bar chunks could be interchangeable. In the end, you see these are in these groups. They were really 4-bar chunks that I needed. So the way this works is random step will choose one of these two before it moves on. So it can have 2 possible intros. So these are 2 variations. They're very similar, but they have slightly different rhythms to them. So every time the combat starts, it's not exactly the same thing over and over. And if I had more time, I might write a whole bunch of these so that it's always doing something different. And then 1 is paired with 2, so these go together. Then after that is when it goes into this random continuous, which will play all 3 of these, but in some sort of random order. Right? And then once it plays all 3 of these, whatever order it chooses, then it's going to head back up to the top. So let's get a listen to this. And you'll hear in there that's mostly based on a cello sound. And that is actually me playing the cello. I'm not a great cello player, basically a beginning student. I know enough just to play notes. But I really wanted to try playing something that was going to be my own sound. And so I had this idea for something that was playing the quick 16th notes using sul pont style. And, again, I'm not the greatest player, but I practiced it a little bit. And what I did is played what you hear in the Combat 1A, the pattern at the beginning. I did my best to play that to a click track up to tempo. And then, if there were little timing inconsistencies, I would correct that once I got it into the sampler. And that's how we get to that organic and synthetic sound. So I'm processing these samples so they don't really sound exactly natural anymore, but they come from a real sound. And I actually did enough takes so they had a lot of slices to choose from, a lot of that back and forth, chicka chicka, so that it didn't have to be the same, let's say 2 slices every single time. So it didn't sound that robotic. So it had this organic timbre, I guess you could say, but with this sort of synthesized feel of it being I was triggering it with MIDI, and so I could have it triggering it to an exact 16th note. And it's kind of cool. I mean, it finds that balance between being something natural, but sucking away the natural aspect a little bit to make it seem, like it goes with this, the sort of futuristic feel of the game. I also have another combat playlist. And the thinking behind this was I wanted, as enemies were eliminated, I wanted the music to be able to change. I didn't want to just peel away some layers. I actually wanted the music to feel like it moved on to a new section. So that gives the player the feeling of progressing. So you start out and you're fighting 7 enemies on the screen and you're overwhelmed. And then when you whittle it down to, 3, I haven't really worked out what number it should be. But then you have this feeling, okay, the music has changed, and it's a little bit, it's still kind of, a pumping tempo, but it's not as intense. And in fact, the biggest difference is that cello sound is not in the low combat sound. This is what it sounds like. And you can hear there was the 3-note motif. So it's a lot of the same instruments from High Combat. So now you have an idea of these playlists. But the question is, how do these playlists interact with each other? How do we actually do the branching, really? I mean, this is part of it, how we can create these subdivisions so we can get out of the music at these defined points. That's part of branching. The other one is, how do I actually branch to that new section? Well, if we go back to the state switch, check this out right here, transitions. This is a neat thing. This, I mean, it wouldn't work without this. And this is sort of the heart of this. You see how many different transitions I've set up. I went through and tried to think of all the possible situations that you'd run into and tweak the settings for that specific situation. It starts off with this. Any to any is a generic transition. And in fact, I don't think I have a special situation for explore into tension. So this actually was used when it goes from explore to tension. And you see right here, exit queue, exit source at exit queue. So this will wait till you get to, let's say in the case of I'm playing explore 1, it'll wait till explore 1 finishes that red handle on it. Then that's when it's going to switch to tension. So it can have some time ahead of time to plan that out and know to line up those two things at the same time. And you see we have play post-exit, play pre-entry. So it's going to, that's what's going to help it blend together. And then we can look at things, let's say like we go from here, none to explore. This is a pretty important one. This is when we first start the game. It uses this, it plays an explore intro. Right, this is a separate piece of music that I wrote that basically takes it from nothing and has a little 1-bar lead in so that it doesn't just start at the beginning of the melody for the explore playlist. And it's only used in the case of none to explore. It won't trigger any other time. Then we have, let's see, going tension back to explore. That's, if you're escaping the situation. Another important one is tension into combat. Now you'll notice here, I have it set on next beat. I could have set this to immediate, but I thought that the difference between immediate and next beat was a small amount of time. And I thought it would be really cool because this combat bridge that plays when you switch to combat will play on some sort of beat within the tension music. So it'll feel like, it might not play on the downbeat, but it'll play on some sort of beat, making it sound like it's not as interruptive. And so, and we also have this, you can set a fade out, a quick fade out over 1 second, so that it doesn't sound like, so the tension music doesn't just cut off out of nowhere and start playing this thing. So that helps them blend together a little bit. Then we have, let's go down a bit. We have the combat back to explore. That's if you escape. Another important one right here, combat into combat win. Now you notice this one is also set to exit queue. So when you finish fighting, it's not just going to end the battle right there and just play some sort of generic ending segment. I've written this combat win segment that will play at the end of the segment. So it'll have that cymbal fade. It'll sound like, oh, there's a build-up coming, and then it has this natural cadence at the end. So it feels like the music naturally came to a close and everything happened the way it should. And that's a good feeling for the player, that everything doesn't feel like it's being interrupted. Right? And then the last ones I wanted to talk about was going into death. This one I set as immediate. So it waits no time whatsoever. And the reason why I didn't do next beat, because there's like a visual element when you get killed and it starts reversing time. You go back into that death loop. And because of that tight synchronization, I wanted to make sure that this death respawn playlist started playing as close as possible to that death, because you're not in control of your player immediately, and I wanted the music to reflect that so that there was no disconnect, that the music played for even half a second that would be noticeable. So immediate is what we used, and I had a fade out just like in the other ones. So now we have a sense for how these things transition together. Now we can get in there and listen to how all this stuff is going to go from one to another. So there's a great tool to demo and test out once you have all this stuff set up. It's called Soundcaster. But before we look at that, I want to take you over to the Events tab. This is a way that you can sort of package all these game syncs so that it can talk with the game engine itself. So let's say you're working in Unity. Unity will actually call a Wwise function that says activate this particular event. And we click here. It says set state combat, right? What is it? Set state combat win. Pretty straightforward. Now, it doesn't have to be straightforward. You can fill this whole page up with all kinds of different things. You can say, I want it to stop all the music. I want it to change it to a new state. I want you to play this one stinger sound effect. So you can do a lot of different things with this. For me, it ended up being pretty simple. But I do also have this start game in here, something you need to do. It sets the state to none, then it plays the state switch, which doesn't play any music. It actually just activates the state switch so that it's ready to go. So now that we looked at that, now we can take a look at Soundcaster. Right, so I have this here. This is something I set up myself. I chose to arrange these events in this way so that it visually made sense to me. So I have on the top row, you see this flow. Start the game, go into explore, go to tension. We have high combat, we have low combat, and then either dying or winning. And then I also have these 3 stingers down here. So I actually haven't mentioned these stingers yet. So let's take a look at these. So you see these are in line with these here, and there's a reason for that, because the way I imagine it, most likely you're going to find an item while exploring. So I wrote this to match the explore music. It's in the same key. It has a similar vibe to it, so that it's not going to stop the music and it's like, hey, I've got an item in the sort of Legend of Zelda style. This, I thought it would be better. As much as I love Legend of Zelda, I thought it might be interesting to try it so that this sound more highlights very gently the fact that you just gained this item. So this is what it sounds like. So this, again, matches with that explore music and just rides on top of it. And then for tension, we have this enemy alert sound. So once the enemy sees you, even if you're not looking at them, this will let you know you've been spotted and you got to be careful. So it's a little bit of an alert, a little bit of a question mark of like, hey, what's going on? You know, so it's like got a little bit of tension to it, but it's not too overbearing. Now the last one, this is something that I would have loved to have in the actual game. I had a lot of trouble when I was playing, especially at the beginning, with the machine pistol. It jams a lot. And the text is kind of small to let you know that it's jammed. And it can be kind of hard to see with everything that's going on. And I really felt like an audio cue would be nice to let you know, like, yeah, something's wrong. You better get out of there. Because it takes a little while to unjam your gun. And if you're out in the open, you're as good as dead. And so I wrote this thing to be the sound that I would want to hear to let me know that something is very, very, very wrong and it needs to be dealt with. So it sounds like this. So to me, it's like borderline kind of horror type sound. You know, it's got cymbal scrapes. That's some of my sounds in there that I recorded as well. Very atonal sounds. On its own, it sounds one way, but when it's playing with the combat music, it cuts through very nicely and it lets you know that something is wrong and needs to be dealt with right away. So it's enough to kind of scare you just a little bit into what just happened. All right, so now that we have all of this, let's demo this along with the video. So that's how the music sounds when it's with the video, and you get an idea of how the music changes and shifts. I mean, it's up to me to hit the button at the right time to get that to line up perfectly. But it gives you an idea of how these transitions are going to happen and how natural they sound. And if you want to make changes, this is a great way to do that. So, yeah, I had a lot of fun putting this together, and it was a really cool way to try to figure out how I would rescore the project and how I would actually do the real implementation. So if you have any questions or comments, leave them down below. I know I went over a lot of stuff, so if there's maybe something I left out, or if you had something I just breezed by too fast and you wanted to get some clarity on what I did either in Wwise or how I went about my composition, let me know. I'd love to chat about this kind of stuff, and I'd love to hear from you. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and have a great one.